Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about rewrites. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how do I explain to my boss that the code needs a major rewrite? You need to be able to explain why it needs a major rewrite and which parts are necessary and the pros and the cons, or like the impact of keeping things as they are, and what's going to improve if you do the major rewrite. As I like to say, the cost benefit analysis has to happen. This is something that I have actually sort of treated this in the same way as I treated back in the day when I first started learning CSS. The CSS was this thing that everybody said is super hard and it's worthless, etc., etc. And a similar thing was said about JavaScript and so forth. And my personal opinion was that, well, I'm not gonna let the fact that something is difficult or so forth, the way people talk about it, hold me back from becoming a master of the thing or being like really, really good at it. I wouldn't say that I am a master of CSS, but I learned how to do it well enough that I don't even think it's a problem anymore. And I did the same thing when it comes to being able to explain to someone what a refactor is and like why it's necessary, and actually break it down into the areas that is actually really, really bad and need to improve. And I argue that the way that you do that, the best way to do it, is that you need to understand the delivery process of software. What are the necessary quality steps, or like the things that have to happen in order for you to deliver stable functionality? And that is one part, understanding how to set up a CI or slash like a CI pipeline or something similar. That's one part at a high level, but it also comes down to that you really need to do what very few software developers do in many cases, and that is to have a really long and hard think about the domain that you find yourself in, and so that you can figure out which parts of the application that you're working on are critical and what's not so critical, so that you can create a priority. As an example, I can give you a very concrete example. I was put in charge of a project a while back where they've had this, let's just say, not so long-term thinking consultant who had been working on the thing, and they basically created this product over about a year, and it was still a pretty raw product. I mean, this would not have passed any code test that I know of, and it had been developed by a single person who really didn't care about long-term stability or quality or anything like that. I mean, we were talking about a code base that was touching some of the most sensitive systems in the company, and there was like not a single unit test. The TypeScript was, in this case, it was a JavaScript application. TypeScript was there, but it wasn't being used by anything for anything. So everything was an any, or like everything was basically untyped, etc., etc. So like we're talking about a system where if you want to scale that to a multi-team type of setup and then do all these sorts of things, it's going to be a challenge. Just due to the way that the code was structured. And so when they put me in charge of it, the first thing I did is what I call the inventory. I argue that anybody who takes over like the responsibility of anything needs to do inventory, where you go through all the things that are part of that sphere. Like you have to understand all the tools around it, the third-party services, what code you have, what tech do you have, etc., etc. So you get a holistic understanding of the situation. And once I had done that, I realized that this application was basically just a UI. It was in this case, it was a Create React app on top of a backend for front-end service system. So it was like client-server type of relationship with a GraphQL backend that connected to an ecosystem of backend service systems that gave like fed data And that was basically it. That was the entire application. And so my stakeholders, they came to me after the first 2 weeks, I think, because I said I'm going to need about 2 weeks to get set up like properly and so forth, and do all the inventory and like set up the roadmap and so forth. And so they asked me, what can we do to fix this? How are we going to scale this thing? And so this exact situation arose for me. Alright, I have to basically recommend a major rewrite. And so I broke it down into one part process related things that needed to change, but one thing was also, the other part was the actual code rewrite itself, where I explained that, well, the main heart of this application is the data layer, where we have all these backend systems that we are connecting to. So that code is a complete mess. There are no types, there are no tests, there's nothing. So the time that we are going to have to spend on debugging, connecting to all these different backend APIs, there's no documentation for any of the APIs either, which means that anytime you want to work with any of the backend systems, you're going to have to kind of guess how the API works. That's really, really bad. We're going to waste tons of time if we don't fix that. So that's the thing that I suggest we focus on. That's the heart of the application, because without the data, nothing is going to be shown on the screen. So my suggestion is that we move that into a more sustainable structure. We add tests, we add types, contract testing would be a really good investment, and we also make sure that we document these APIs so we know how they're supposed to work. And also which what teams, like what company. I don't even know who owns these APIs, but we need to have connections to those people, because if they change things or something goes wrong on their end, we need to be able to reach out to them. Said and done. My coworker or my stakeholders, my manager said, yeah, that sounds like a really good investment. And I said, yeah, because practically without that, it's very difficult to maintain this, and it's going to take a lot longer to fix anything related to issues and bugs and so forth. So that's a very good investment. And then I go, well, the next thing we should take a look at is to make sure that we get up our unit test coverage, because there are no unit tests right now, and in a code base that is this loosely typed, that's just the second thing we should focus on. We should just add TypeScript, because right now we don't actually know if a lot of this stuff is broken. Anything could be broken. It's very difficult. Now this was a very simple application, so we probably were fine there, but going forward we should add that on top so that we can scale the system to a larger size without having to be worried that we keep on breaking things due to, using the wrong symbols or things like that. Coworker said again, like, yeah, that seems like a reasonable thing, and so forth. And then I said, yeah, and there are tons of like these React components that could be rewritten and so forth, but I think that if we focus on these two main areas first, we will get about 80% of the value. And then of course we need to set up a CI pipeline because we didn't have that either, where tests are being run as part of every deployment or every like merged to the master branch, etc., etc. And I kind of went through it like step by step, and then we created a technical roadmap. Now, the thing that I just did was to very, very concretely explain a big rewrite of the system. We're talking about months of work, but I made sure that I understood all the things that were going to be rewritten, and I took the time to actually explain the benefit and the reason for the rewrite to each of my stakeholders, so that they understood what's going on. It's similar to how a doctor or someone is going to explain like a medical procedure or so forth to the patient. You have to make the patient understand why you're doing things so that they feel a sensation of understanding. Because if you just say it's just ugly code, that doesn't sound like, it's sort of like, you ask yourself, if someone tells you, here, pay me a whole heap of money to do something, and all you say is, because it's really important. That's not really a gratifying answer, and it makes it less likely that people are going to give you what you need in order to do this thing. Because just as yourself, if you can probably relate to this, it's sort of common among humans that if we're going to do something, we sort of want to know why we are doing it. So what I want you to take away from this is that in order for you to explain why you need a major rewrite to your boss, I suggest that you do an inventory of your code and make sure that you actually understand yourself why you are making the rewrite. And then you should be able to explain to another person why certain areas of the code needs to be rewritten and why it's so important that that part gets rewritten and what's actually going to be improved. You should have an understanding of, just as an engineer of like a car or something like that, you should know that, well, if something is wrong with the engine or the brakes or, you know, the airbag or something like that, that's a major problem. We need to really, really focus on that thing. And so selling the idea that you're going to focus on quality there is probably not going to be so hard for you if you can really explain it. But it's going to be harder for you to explain that, well, the leather on the seat is not as nice or something like that, if that makes sense. Because some things are more important than other things, and you have to be good enough to know what is a good investment and what's a bad investment, because you cannot create perfect software. Once you learn that skill, create a technical roadmap and explain all the things that you want to do. Just explain why it's important and explain how it's going to be done, etc., etc., so that it feels to the stakeholder or your boss as if, yeah, this person has really thought about this and it does seem reasonable. Let's go for it. Because what you're doing is, my friend, you're pitching to another person that these are investments that you should make because they are going to end with a better code base or something like that. And when you're pitching, any salesperson will tell you, the better you are at explaining to your customer or your boss or whoever why you're doing something and why you want to do something, the more likely it is that they are going to say yes. Have a great day.